Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story. Hello there. This is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same can happen to you. So when you listen to any other Deal by Me podcast, please support this podcast with a donation or a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. If you're viewing any other podcasts on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To supporters of this podcast, we say thank you. Check out my encouraging, inspiring, and transforming books. I'm available for speaking engagements, in person and virtual seminars. So please contact me through my website, www.dealbyme.com. I have with me Dr. Joy Bracey, who uses her background, education, and experiences to spread the message about the life changing impact of self love and mindfulness. She says, if you're looking for a deeper understanding of your relationship with food and your body, she encourages you to listen to the easy way out. I have an awesome guest today, and I am asking that you give her really your divided attention while you're listening to this podcast, as she's going to share some very exciting information with us. Joy, I hope you don't mind me just calling you Joy. I like to be very informal.
I
And
love it.
so I'm just going to say, Joy, welcome to the podcast. And will you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you've been interviewed from?
Thank you for having me. I am Joy Bracey, Dr. Joy Bracey, and I live in New Orleans, Louisiana. I've lived here most of my life. And I am a licensed professional counselor. I've been in the addiction field for about 25 years, which is wild to think about. I am I teach self-love, self-awareness, and self-healing on social media, in workshops, retreats, and newly as an adjunct professor for Columbia University Teachers College. Um, so exciting. So I've been going through, really, I learn by teaching. And so I've been working on my mind, body, and spirit connection, teaching self-love and self-awareness as I'm learning it and applying these practices. And so in real time, it's been unfolding for me. And so once I nail one skill and get that in my tool belt, I see what that opens up for me as the next possibilities of what I can have and bring to my life. Um, and one of the things that's happened throughout this is that I've lost 165 pounds.
Mm,
I have taken advantage of medical treatments, really opened my eyes to the fact that obesity is a medical disease with medical solutions, that it's not all about calories in, calories out. It's not our fault because so many of us are suffering with this. And I
mhm,
did. I was 337 pounds, and at approaching 50, it was unmanageable for me to stay that way. I was losing mobility and my
mm,
weight was climbing and I was just really uncomfortable.
mm,
Um, I really embraced body positivity, so it was never about the way that I looked. I was always happy with that, but I had to get honest with myself, which is part of self-love, about the consequences to living at that size and really figure out how to address it. So that's why I made the podcast, The Easy Way Out, WEIGH,
mm,
because I dug deep with all of my therapist tools, my mind, body, spirit tools. I talked with a doctor, with therapists, with my friends, my children, my adult children. We talked about what it was like for them to grow up chubby and to grow up in a so-called fat family, and what it was like for them with me always trying to lose weight, and how I handled their weight and how I could have done better for them as kids. I think that's such an
mhm,
important conversation.
mm,
But I did that as an act of love for my fellow larger people and anyone who has anyone in their lives who's dealing with that, or any unhealed coping mechanisms that we learn in childhood, survival skills, I call them. It was for eating food to quiet my negative, so-called negative feelings, was a survival skill I developed in childhood. So that's about me and what I'm doing, what I'm up to. And yeah, that's
Okay. Well, I want you to know that I had the opportunity to read your profile and all that you were doing, and very exciting and very impactful. And I just want to focus on a few of the things that I think would be interesting to listeners of this podcast. I note that you said that you had lost about 165 pounds. Tell listeners of this podcast, how that has changed your life.
Oh my goodness. I cannot even begin to tell you the ways that it's changed my life. I feel like I have a whole new life. It's a
Okay.
whole new, it's like joy 2.0.
Okay.
My mobility is my favorite thing. I mean, little
Mhm.
things like there were times, so I've lost 2 feet of girth from around my hips.
Mm.
You can imagine just that alone, what a difference that makes. Like, so a lot of times if you park in a parking lot and then someone parks too close to your
Mhm.
door, I couldn't get in. If I was in a rush, I would have to climb in through my trunk, which was also very uncomfortable at 337 pounds. But I had to do that several times. It's humiliating and it hurt. It, caused bruising,
Mhm.
trying to climb over the center
Mhm.
console and over the back seat. It was terrible. Um, Now I can squeeze in, there's not
Mhm.
been a situation where someone parked too close, or like think about like if you are crossing the street but a car is coming, you can pick up the pace and get a good little jog going to get where you're going. That's new for me.
Mhm.
I could walk faster, but that was about it. I mean, there was no running involved in my life at all. I'm
Mm.
so much more comfortable. I was in so much pain all the time, and I didn't know it was because of my size. Believe it or not, I just thought feet hurt. Like that
Mhm.
if you cook a big dinner for your family, by the end of it, your feet are going to be hurting. And I thought that was normal. And now my feet never hurt. That's just not a part of my life anymore. Um, the other thing that I'm loving is the fashion. I'm really getting to develop a personal style,
Mm.
where before I only could shop at a few places and it was getting smaller and smaller because I was at a size 26 or 28, which is the very top of what you can buy in a store. And I was really worried about what I was going to do after that. Now I'm a size 8. I can shop anywhere I want to shop, and I get to choose from all the options and have a colorful wardrobe full of personality that I love. And one thing that I like to tell people is that when I was a larger woman, and I liked lots of things about being a larger woman, I loved the hugs that I gave to people. I felt like my hugs were soft and cozy and
Mhm.
really, they just felt good. And I was afraid to give that up. That was one thing that I thought I was going to have to give up. And I did have to give that up. But what I've discovered as a benefit to being this size is that when I hug people, I can get so much closer. That 2 feet of girth, like the personal space is a lot.
Mm.
I'm closer to other people. And so when I hug them, I actually can be heart to heart. I can
Mm.
feel their heart against my heart. So hugs for me are so much more energy giving and life giving and love giving.
Mm.
And that's something I didn't expect. So that's just a few of the things, but of course there's like a million ways.
I
I don't
I I
No more
understand.
cholesterol meds, no more
Uh,
CPAP machine, all of that.
well, I do understand that. I'm not so sure about the CPAC machine now because I don't know that I'm overweight, but I still use my CPAC machine. So, but you also talk a lot about your. I don't know how you phrase it, but self-love,
Mm.
and you talked about how it played a role in your weight loss. I mean, could you just talk a little bit about that and show the listeners of the podcast Well, know what you mean by self-love. Is that just loving yourself, or is there something else to this that you want to bring out and share with listeners?
Definitely, because I think self-love is such a catchphrase. Everyone's talking about it. When I was growing up, my mom, that was one thing she did right. She for sure talked, oh, you have to love yourself, you have to love yourself. And I thought, sure, I love myself. Great. I thought I had that in the bag. And then I wanted to host a women's retreat. And so I talked to a bunch of women about what they needed help with, and they kept saying the inner critic. And I thought,
Mm,
well, I need to do some research about the inner critic. And what I did was I realized I tuned into my own thoughts
mhm,
that I was feeding myself. And I realized that my inner critic was running the show. I was full on impacted by negative self talk all day. And so I started developing tools to address it. And then once I was able to conquer that, self-love moved in, and I was like, whoa, this is where it's really at. And I didn't have self-love at all. Like, one indication to me that I did not have self-love was that I was in a relationship where my partner would literally say things like, I don't care how you feel. um and those sentences that he would say were so hurtful and so harmful, yet I stayed in the relationship. When I'm a very feeling person, I'm a very sensitive and loving person. And I really had to be honest with myself and reconcile. I cannot have self-love and allow a person to treat me this way. And there were other things we don't need to get into, but just
mhm,
basically facing that. And the same with my weight. You know, being 337 pounds and being body positive, I never let myself look at the truth of the consequences of my size. Like, for example, an obese person is higher risk for 13 different types of cancer. You can take up to 13 years off of your lifespan. You're at risk for dying
mm,
younger from any cause at all.
mhm,
Um, and I was never allowing myself to even acknowledge those things. So letting the honesty creep in.
mhm,
But so then teaching people that and saying, like, okay, I didn't have self-love when I thought I did. It doesn't mean I think I'm great and I think I love myself. It's really so much deeper than that. It's, how do you take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis? How do you honor your own feelings? Are you turning your back on yourself like I was by
mhm,
allowing another person to treat you in a way that's totally out of alignment with your values? Are you turning your back on yourself by going to a job every day where you're not happy?
mm.
Are you turning your back on yourself in any number of ways, with the food that you're eating, with your, the friendships that you have or don't have? So tuning in, I now act as my own best friend. I am my
Mm.
own best friend. I am my own, I do meal prep so that I can have nutritious food because I care about myself and I want to give myself that
Okay.
gift. And I
Okay.
thank myself for those little acts of kindness and love. So it's really a practice. Self-love is a daily practice of how you treat yourself, how you talk to yourself, and your behaviors around making your life the way you want it to be.
Very, very interesting. I think what you are saying would make a lot of sense to a lot of listeners because sometimes we just look at it, you know, in one way. Do you love yourself? And you're not looking at it from the total perspective of what you are saying self-love is. So I hear that. Uh, I want to ask you something else because when we first started, I think you said something about, don't feel bad or don't worry about the fact that you are overweight because sometimes you can't help it. It's an addiction. I believe you said something like that. And if I'm wrong about that, then let me know. But I'm wondering, is there a connection? And if so, what is the connection between uh, addiction and obesity? Because I think listeners of this podcast would like to know that answer. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Sure, and education is so important into unlocking the shame that we feel around this. There's so
Okay.
much shame put on larger people, and it's really not our fault. So I'll try to quickly go through the connection of the way that it works, right? The science and also the feelings that go
Hmm.
with it. So the first thing is that obesity is a genetic thing. It is, you have a predisposition to be obese or not. You can, of course, go in either direction. You can not have the gene and maybe become obese, or you can have the gene and not. But if, like for me, I'll use myself as an example. In childhood, my feelings were just not okay at home. I had a parent with addiction, and it was not allowed. Like, there was no room for me to have my feelings hurt or to be disappointed or angry or any of that. So if I expressed any of those things, I would be clamped down, maybe spanked, or shut down and hurt in some emotional way. And so food was a survival tool. I had food in the house, had access to it. And so my brain got used to dopamine, which is the feel good chemical that your brain releases when you do something that makes you feel good, right? That's the feel good chemical. I would get dopamine from ice cream after dinner, and the cookie at my lunch tray in school. And so my brain got used to that because it wasn't coming in a whole bunch of places, right? So the food was like where the dopamine was coming. And over time, the way any addiction works is that your brain, your body needs more and more of that substance to get the same feel good. And you start to lose the feel good chemicals that come from things that are healthy, like the way you should get dopamine. Like now I get dopamine from cleaning up my kitchen. It feels so good in there now. Or hugging your baby or walking your dog. Those things give us natural, healthy hits of dopamine. And when you're addicted to anything, your brain starts to give you less and less for those things. And so then you really become hyper focused on that substance of choice, which for me was baked goods. Um, and then with that genetic predisposition for obesity, you have these factors, environmental and genetic, that are now playing together to form your personality and your coping mechanisms. So for me, over time, that meant that before I even, because I was turning my back on myself and not honoring my feelings were never allowed. So I didn't even want to feel them. I didn't want to acknowledge, how any particular situation made me
Hmm.
feel.
Hmm.
So I would, before even stress or overwhelm or anger would even register, sometimes just a craving would come. And if you feed that craving with a Snicker bar or a cookie or ice cream, then, or two, right? The the dopamine comes and you feel relaxed, and then you can handle life. I jokingly say that my doctorate and all of my accomplishments as a nonprofit CEO and as a mom and everything I've ever done is brought to you by Ben and Jerry, because I really coped with stress by eating sugar. And so, and then the hormones that regulate how hungry you feel, what you crave, how much you need to eat, when you feel full, get all out of whack. So then all of those things are fighting against. And then every time you lose weight and gain it back, your metabolism gets messed up. And so our body gets very confused. And then our body is really trying to hold on to that weight. And then no matter what you do, you could be in a calorie deficit, you can do whatever you want, the hormones are going to fight against you. And so I have obesity. Even though I'm not obese, I'm going to have to manage my obesity the way that a diabetic would have to manage diabetes or high blood pressure or whatever for the rest of my life. I'm going to have to manage my obesity.
You're saying
My
something.
body is always going to want me to gain the weight back.
Okay, you're saying something that's very interesting now because, see, I was a gambler,
Mm.
and I'm thinking in terms of this obesity. Is it is that the same, or would it be the same as saying once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, or once a compulsive gambler, always a compulsive gambler? Are you saying that if you are an obesity, well, if you are an obese person, you are always an obese person? Am I hearing that right?
Well, kind of. So
Okay.
a lot of, and nothing is true for everyone, right? I have
Okay.
seen in my years in the addiction field, there are people who can kick their habit without
Hmm.
any treatment and they never touch it again.
Okay.
That is very rare, though. So when I say these things, understand that this is not true for every single human being.
Okay. Okay.
But if you have a problem with gambling addiction or compulsive gambling, it's probably a good idea for the rest of your life to manage that by not going to places where gambling is taking place, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that right now you are gambling or that you are. I am not obese. I'm
Hmm.
not. I am,
Okay.
my BMI, all that. I'm not an obese person.
Okay.
I have the disease of obesity, the metabolic disease of obesity that
Hmm.
I will have to always monitor. Will always have to make sure that my weight is in check, make sure that 'cause sometimes cravings will come. If I indulge those, then maybe I'm going to have more cravings and I'll start to see the weight creep back up. So it's just something that has to be managed just like any person with any other addiction, but also there's a biological component to this.
Okay. I got you.
Just
I
like
understand.
any other disease. You can't just like a person who's in remission from cancer still has to go back and get checked to make
Hmm.
sure, right?
Right.
So it's a lifelong management.
I got.
And
I
it's addiction in combination with the hormones that control our hunger and our reward system.
I got you. I understand exactly what you're saying. Li- reading your bio, your profile, I take it that you've accomplished so much in in your life. Yeah, yeah. Talked about the degrees you have and what you're doing, and uh, yet you fail at weight loss over and over.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about what held you back from losing the weight in those years? I know where you are now, but
Yeah.
when you first, start tackling this situation.
That's such a great question. And it is, I mean, this is something that puzzled me. People talk about like there's such fat phobia in our society and there's so much shame put on fat people. And I use the word fat to reclaim it. It's not
Hmm.
a bad word for me.
Hmm.
Um, so we put all of this on people and so we feel like it's our fault. We have a lot of shame around it. And I think I've uncovered, and this is a lot of what gets talked about in the Easy Way Out, the podcast. There are lots of things about being 337 pounds that benefited me that I did not really want to let go of. Like being able to eat whatever I wanted. I really liked that. That was fun. Being able to eat as many pieces of king cake without feeling guilty, being able to eat whatever, bake amazing things and eat that. I didn't have to worry about that because my weight was okay with me and I don't care. And, you know, honestly, I wasn't making myself happy, but it felt like it because of dopamine,
Hmm.
right? Which is really a lie and a cruel trick that our brains play on us because it's really not giving us real happiness. No cookie can make you really happy. um, but so one of the things that I uncovered and talked a lot about in the podcast is that I felt safer in the world at 337 pounds because of sexual trauma, because of all kind of factors of
Hmm.
just fear that the world was not a safe place for me when I was growing up. I felt this false sense of protection that those added layers and the added weight gave me. My daughter and I in the podcast joke about if someone was trying to kidnap me, that's going to be a two-man job. Like if I drop dead weight, you're not going to be able to lift me into your van. I'm not
Hmm.
going anywhere.
Hmm.
So I had to really work on that before I got to this weight because I knew that if I got to this weight, still holding on to that being fat was my safety, that I would make it happen again, that I would go back to being that size for sure.
Okay.
So that's one factor. There's a lot. I mean, being a full figured plus size woman was my identity for my whole adulthood. And I had to let go of that. I had to say, well, I don't know who I'm going to be. I don't know what my body is going to look like. Am I going to have saggy skin? I'm not going to look 16 again. That's for sure. I'm the size that I was when I was 16, but I do not have my 16-year-old body for sure. So, all of those fears, like, is my face going to look older and wrinkly? Like, what's going
Mhm.
to happen to my body? And then just moving through, like, I'll tell you, the other day at the theater, a man grabbed my shoulder and pushed my body. Like, he pushed me in a direction out of his way and said something rude to me. And I was like in shock because no one touched me like that and came into my space when I was 337 pounds.
Okay, I
So
got
there are
you.
things that women who are smaller face that I'm just learning, but I
Mhm.
was afraid. I kind of knew there would be a bunch of things that I wasn't ready for, and there are, and that's true. But what I ultimately I had to do was trust myself that I can keep myself safe, trust myself that I will take care of myself and not turn my back on myself anymore. So if I'm feeling unsafe, I will leave a space or I will stand up for myself instead of worrying about my safety. I have a plan. I know how to keep myself safe.
Well said. Well said. You know, I know there are people who are listening to or who will listen to this podcast who are going through maybe some of the same things that you're going through and have gone through. Many may be overweight uh, and feeling a little probably hopeless. You know, feeling as if they don't know how they're going to handle the situation. And so, from my perspective and from my podcast, dealing with trying to encourage and inspire and transform, what would you say to listeners of this podcast who may be dealing with the same issues that you have dealt with, or maybe going through something else that they feel as if they can't handle, or they're feeling that is more than what they can basically deal with? What would you say to them that would be encouraging, inspiring, and hopefully transforming?
I would say that if I can do this, you can do anything. I was
Hmm. Okay.
completely in the grip of food since I was in first or second grade.
Okay.
I never have been free of it until now. And that if you advocate for yourself, stand up for yourself, be there for you, be your own best friend, your own caretaker, act as though you're your best friend. Like even picture your best friend's voice. What would your best friend say to your doctor if your doctor is being rude to you about your weight or denying you medical care for your weight? What would your best friend do? That's what I think of.
Hmm. Okay.
And then that as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other with taking care of you in mind, you will
Hmm.
get where you want to go because all of those dreams that you have for yourself are put there for a reason. We are supposed to be working toward those, supposed to be taking steps to achieve that. And that is your purpose. And no matter how big the dream is, you can achieve it. You can do it.
Wow.
It just takes believing that it's yours.
Hmm. Well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. Listeners, don't go any place. We got a few more questions and responses from Dr. Joy that we want you to hear. But I want to give Dr. Joy now the opportunity to share with listeners of this podcast how they can learn a little bit more about you. Uh, if you have a podcast or if you have a book, would you take the time to just share a little bit about that with listeners of this podcast?
Yeah, so I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and others at Dr. Joy Bracey, DrJoyBracey. You can find me. You can find daily videos about cultivating self-love, self-awareness, mindfulness, and all kinds of other emotional intelligence, emotional skills, communication skills, relationship things. A lot of times it's follower directed. They ask me, please, can you make a video about this? And then I do workshops and things like that. You can keep an eye out at my website, drjoybracey.com. And then the podcast is anywhere you listen to podcasts. And that's The Easy Way Out, WEIGH, with Dr. Joy Bracey. And I would say that that podcast would be for anyone who, as a survival mechanism, has developed a coping skill that is no longer working for them,
Mm,
whether it's gambling or food or drinking or any of that stuff, anything you're doing that is not healthy that you want to change. Because really the feelings underneath all of that are the same. You are looking for something to fill a hole that was put there probably by someone else and some trauma. And it's never going to lead you to where you're hoping that it will. It's only a temporary fix.
Well said. Thank you for sharing. I want to ask you a couple more questions and get your response. You grew up as a child being overweight, had parents. How should parents of overweight children uh, handle it to make sure they aren't making their children feel worse about themselves?
Yes. So I just want to say, to clarify, I wasn't overweight as a child because I was extremely into sports. And so whatever I ate
Okay.
was taken care of until I hit adulthood. But
Oh,
I had
okay.
children with a man who was overweight his whole life and in his childhood. And so genetically, my kids were just predisposed to it. And no matter the fact that I fed them healthy food and they were active, they were overweight. And I was overweight at the time and always trying to lose weight. And I never made it an issue for them. I didn't really talk about it except when I would be trying to get healthy. Like, okay, guys, we're going to be going to the park more. We're going to go for walks. We're going to get healthy. I thought I was doing the right thing. And talking to my adult children who still struggle with their weight and them being honest with me about the impacts of my actions on them has taught me so much. And I'm so happy to share that. But the thing that we discovered that would have been better is to actually talk about it.
Hmm.
And, you know, like, for example, my daughter was so eloquent in the podcast. She talks about how it would have been so good if someone would have told her that her body wasn't a problem, that she could just have it and live in it and be happy, and that bodies look all kinds of ways, and that her body was beautiful and acceptable and not a problem. Because my always saying, okay, guys, we're going to get healthy, always sent the message that her body needed to be fixed. It was a problem and it wasn't okay, that we had to change it. And that's the message that we as parents are sending when we talk about that. Of course, we never want as parents to criticize our children's bodies, call them names. Like, these things go without saying. We are not going to fat shame our children, right? Or put
Hmm.
our children on diets. That's a terrible idea. Um, if a child is overweight, a diet is not going to fix it in the long term, period. End of
Okay.
story. No diets.
Mm.
Um, you teach them that all bodies are okay from the little age, before they're ever chubby or overweight, from babies. You talk about that because kids will ask. I remember my kids all asking, like, oh, look at that lady, her body, she's really big or whatever. You take that as an opportunity and say, bodies look all different kinds of ways. Isn't it amazing? Like, she
Mm.
looks very happy and she's moving around at that size, and you can also look happy and move around at this size. Drawing that out for your children to let them know that their bodies can look all different kinds of ways and it's acceptable. And then being so, in my daughter's words, be so loud about your love for your children. Be so supportive and so excited for them, and include their body in their compliments. You are so beautiful. Your body is so healthy and strong and beautiful. Just really driving that message home. Um, Parents want so badly for their kids to be thin. And that actually is the problem. Like, I thought my kids needed to be thin, that I was doing something wrong that they weren't. And actually, they were healthy, they were fine. And not to say that it's okay to let your child just gain, gain, gain. If they are eating so much, if you see them turning to food for emotional support, that's what needs to be addressed. Don't tell them your eating is a problem, because the eating is not the problem. What's the problem is they don't have coping skills that that are healthy.
Hmm.
So how can you support giving them those coping skills? And how can we support, maybe getting therapy? Maybe the school counselor could get involved in that. Maybe there's, social skills programs that are going on at your kids' school, things that, or is your child being traumatized? Is there something going on in their life that maybe you're not aware of that they're hiding from?
Mm.
You know, do they have a safe space to express
Hmm.
how they feel, and how can you draw that out? So if you're starting to see those coping things, you can step in and address that, but never, ever, ever address it with the food, because all that
Okay.
does is add shame.
Wow. I hear you. I hear you. This is really interesting. I just want to make sure that I get a perspective for listeners of this podcast, because in the beginning, I was under the impression that you, even as a teenager or young growing up, were was obese or overweight. But
Mhm.
I understand now that you were not obese. That happened at a later time in your life. So when did that start? That you began to, or that you were
Yeah. So,
obese, if I may. Maybe I'm not saying this correctly, but I
no, you
hope
did.
you understand where I am.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to clarify that's important.
Okay.
So I did start using food to stuff my feelings when I was probably 4 years old. I remember getting a cupcake for my fifth birthday. That was the only present. And it was actually one of those twin packs of like those Hostess cupcakes with the swirly icing on top. And I
Mhm.
didn't have to share with my brother. And I shared everything with my brother because we were very, very poor. And that was my birthday present, and I was so excited about it, and I like, that cupcake meant love to me, and I was
Mhm.
5 years, that was my 5th birthday, my golden birthday. Um, so I used food that way my whole life, as far back as I can remember, to stuff my feelings and to feel good when I wasn't always feeling good in the circumstances I was in. But because I was an athlete, because I didn't have money to go buy more snacks, I didn't have a choice about what snacks were in the kitchen in my house, and my parents tried to eat relatively healthy. I could only get what I could get, right? So the weight didn't pile on at all until I got a car and money and my own private place, my own kitchen that I could eat in. And as soon as that happened, the obesity, I was overweight by about, mm, 19, and really like full into obesity by the time I was 21 years old. When I got
Okay.
married, I had a plus size wedding dress when I was 21 years old.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
Now you've cleared it up for me, and we understand exactly where you are and your story. Very impactful, Dr. Joy, I must say, very interesting. And I'm certain that listeners of this podcast will benefit greatly from just listening to you. And I'm hoping they're going to uh, listen to your podcast and learn even more about you. But you have an awesome story. Again, I want to thank you for sharing today.
Thank you for having me,
And there you have it, Joy Bracely, Dr. Joy Bracely,
Bracey.
who's Bracey, okay, who says she lost over 100 pounds throughout the course of producing the show. And you'll find out exactly how she did it and more on the easy way out. And I want to emphasize that this is Weigh, Weigh, not WAY, but WEIGH. You can check our podcast out anywhere where you listen to your podcast. Again, we say thank you. And until next time, peace and blessings to each of you.